Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Kirsch, and this week we're tasked with historical scholarship, with looking at a couple databases. I looked at the Confederate Generals in the Trans-Mississippi, Volume 1 essays by Lawrence Hewitt, Arthur Bergeron, Thomas Schultz from Project Muse, and Ambivalent Visions for Victory, Davis Lee and Confederate Grand Strategy by Emery Thomas from the Oxford Academic. I was hoping to look at qualitative research of command posts and orders and letters between different generals and different theaters, as Jefferson Davis felt that there was an immense lacking of leadership among the general staff. General Lee would go on at the end of the war stating that a lot of the battles they fought, that he was embarrassed by how these were fought. By looking at the different orders and at the different theaters, there was the Western Theater and the Eastern Theater. With looking at specific generals of the Eastern Theater, mainly being Jeb Stuart and George Pickett, who were right there with General Lee. So there was very little interpretation for orders versus the Western Theater, where it was PGT Beauregard, among others, who were often relieved and they were put in this area. Looking at how General Lee and the breakdown of these orders and how these generals fought these battles was essentially how the Confederacy General Command disintegrated towards the end of the war. This with the shift of battle tactics, switching from the traditional battlefield to a more guerrilla warfare. These generals didn't know how to lead these troops and these ordeals. And General Lee at the end, just there was no blame placed on one specific general, but all the generals bore some form of uh, fault. I hope to create publications and hopefully some literature, even though immense has been written about different engagements, but that Jefferson Davis felt that he could lead the Confederacy uh, irked generally, because Jefferson Davis didn't really have any long-term military careers, where Jefferson Davis hoped to have the defensive option and outlasting the Union. This was much to the chagrin of many of the generals of the Confederacy, and with the lack of resources towards the end of the battle, there was a lot, they were put in impossible situations where they were called upon to lead troops into battle with lacking resources. Again, with looking at the Eastern Theater versus the Western Theater, the Eastern Theater, we see a lot more of these Confederate strongholds that Union generals sought to destroy and capture. The lack of adequate commands and hesitant commands shows insight that even though the Confederacy did have several strong generals, they just couldn't come together. Again, there were a handful of political enemies that were put in the officer corps together that would share commands. So just looking at the general leadership and general corps, officer corps of the Confederacy, and how even though many of these battles were fought on Southern soil, why there was just a lack of communication and follow through, even though they did hold their own for a while in the beginning of the war. But essentially, the leadership just teetered out, either calling in resignations or just essentially giving up. Again, thank you and have a wonderful week.